the story that we have from Exodus today, the giving of the 10 Commandments, begins a legalistic covenant between God and his people. A covenant, a relationship based on the law. And the way they perceived it was that God said, do this, do this, do this, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. And you've got it nailed. Never really worked out that way, but that was the perception. And they had it figured out. Actually, after all the commentaries were written, I think there were 613 laws, mostly expansions of these 10 laws that we read today. Do this and this and this and this and this and this. Don't do that or that or that or that or that. And on and on. And now we live in a new covenant. A covenant not based in law, but in God's grace. And it's much more difficult because we spend a lot of time thinking we don't really know what to do. Actually, most of us spend a lot of time saying, do that and that and that and that, but not this and this and this and this. Because we would rather have it under control, have it all nailed down, have it written down in black and white and a little bit of red, than just have to say we have to work this out ourselves. I'm glad to be here this morning. I'm always glad to be at St. Matthew's. I think it's wonderful that y'all wait until I get here to roast a pig. I really appreciate that. I'm glad to be with my friend Steve and my friend Rick. I hope that y'all will all get a chance to meet my friend Mary Groff, a deacon in the church. And now the whole church is assembled, almost in proportion. A couple of priests, a deacon, a lot of lay people, and one bishop. I grew up in an Episcopal church, larger than this one, with stained glass windows like that, with people in the windows, so that when the sermon got too long, you had an opportunity to wonder who those people were. And my mom and dad made me come to church every Sunday, and I had plenty of opportunities to wonder who those people were, and count how many boards there were in the ceiling, and find the oldest hymn in the hymnal. And after a while, I realized that I was sort of envious of those people in the stained glass window, St. John, St. Matthew, St. Lucia. People who had seen God, people who had talked to Jesus. And I wanted to be one of those people that God spoke to directly, so I wouldn't have to guess at it anymore. Wouldn't it be so much easier if God would just say, here's what you do? No, don't do that. When I was 13 years old, I went to a meeting at the church, and I had a little time to talk to the priest, and I came back and told my mom and dad that I wanted to be a priest. My dad, the civil engineer, said, "Oh no, Kee, you have to be good to be a priest." But my mom, who always came from a different direction, said, "Oh, Kee." There's actually a long collection of stories that start with, "Oh, Kee." Actually, I just wanted to be like the priest. But the idea just sort of never let go of me. I went all the way through junior high school and high school telling people that I was going to be a priest in the Episcopal Church. Can you imagine anything goobier than that? And I thought somewhere in there that, having now dedicated my life to the priesthood, that God would show up. You know, a little sign, a little lightning, a little vision of the Virgin Mary in the night or something. Something special effects like. Something that regular people wouldn't get. I'm going to be a priest after all, and surely he owes me something. I'm pretty sure I went to seminary with that same idea. At the age of 22, I went to seminary. What were we thinking? And thought, well, this is where all the answers are. These are the people that know these things. They've got these big fat books and big fat words, and it will be revealed to me. But God remained a mystery. And I was ordained deacon and then priest and started to work and kept praying that God would send me a sign until I forgot to pray about that anymore and moved on to other things. It's been my great privilege for a long time to work at a summer camp for people with mental and physical disabilities. I've learned a lot from those folks. A few years ago, we had a new camper, a camper that was born without optic nerves. He had never seen anything, not even light and dark. He is a smart guy. He plays the piano very well. He swims very well. He's actually a very talented guy. He just can't see. So the first time he came to camp, we were trying to figure out which of the counselors we would assign to this guy, Charles. We didn't want it to be one of our best counselors because we had other campers that would be more difficult to take care of, but you didn't want to put a rookie counselor with him because the counselor would really need to stay with him all the time. We'd had a counselor the year before whose name was Gabe, who happened to be a member of the parish that I was serving at the time. And he had proven himself to be lovable and sweet and kind of a bonehead. He didn't actually go looking for trouble, but he didn't resist it when it came looking for him. He and I talked about that. Now he's coming back for his second summer. And one of the other people on adult staff said, let's put Gabe with Charles. I said, no, he's a bonehead. We can't do that. And they said, well, this way he'll have to stay with his camper. And so they talked me into it, and we assigned Gabe to Charles, and the campers all came. Chaos erupted. After a while, it kind of settled out. I was tending to things that needed to be tended to and didn't really pay much attention until sort of the middle of the session, and I realized that Gabe was really doing a good job. He was right there with Charles all the time. The last full day of camp, I was in the dining hall, which is down toward the bottom of everything. And one of the young counselors came to get me and said, Charles is about to jump off the diving board. Well, okay, that's fine with me. He can swim. That's not a big deal. She said, the high dive. I don't know how many of y'all have ever been to the pool at Camp McDowell. The high dive's like 80 feet up there, emotionally anyway. I've never been up there to look down, but it looks awfully high. So I sprinted up the hill. Okay, I waddled quickly up the hill. And by that time, most of the camp was there around the pool, and they're all saying, Charles, Charles, Charles. Charles has just finished climbing up the ladder. And he's holding on to the iron rails on both sides. And there is Gabe the boneheaded counselor, right behind him. I can't hear what Gabe is saying, but I can imagine that he's saying, okay, now take another step. Okay, now your other leg go. Okay. Now you have to let go of the rail. Take another step. Just one more. And when you're ready, jump in. And he did. And fell for a long time. And after just a little bit came up, the whole campus going crazy. Yay, Charles, Charles. And Gabe jumped off the side just like we told him not to all that time. Gabe, formerly boneheaded, jumped in and helped Charles find the ladder to get back out. Can you imagine? Can you imagine climbing up all that way, walking out on a board that you cannot see, and because this guy that you've only known for a few days says, now jump, having that much faith, trusting him so much. I think I made a mistake when I was waiting all those years for God to show up. And in my arrogance, didn't realize that he had always been here the whole time. It turns out that faith is not about figuring it out. It's not about having it all written down. It's not about being in control. God preserve us. It's about coming to the edge and trusting the one that is up there with us and stepping out into the darkness in trust, in faith. We are not in control. We're not gonna figure it all out. God makes us choose and gives us the freedom to ignore God altogether and pretend that this is our life. This is my stuff. When, of course, it really is God's. We are not the owners of anything at all, not even our own lives, not even the next breath we take, but we are stewards of life, stewards of God's gifts. If it was all written down, it would be easy enough to know what we're supposed to do. We may not do it, but it's much more challenging than that. So one of the followers of Jesus, one of those people in the stained glass windows wanting to get it nailed down a little bit, said, "Which of these is the greatest commandment, Lord?" And Jesus said, "Love God with all you are and all you have, and love your neighbor as much as you love yourself." And I can just imagine that they were waiting for him to say, chapter and verse and several other commandments. Do this and this and this, but don't do that or that or that. None of that. Love God. Love your neighbor. Love yourself. Today we have a lot going on, and this sermon probably should have been shorter than it's going to wind up being. But when I finally do finish, we'll move on to baptism and confirmation. We're not set up so that a priest can just sneak up behind somebody and douse them with water and call it baptized. The bishop can't just jump on you and confirm you whether you want to or not. It takes a congregation. It takes a congregation to say, here's what we believe. We renew our baptismal covenant, not a covenant of law, not a covenant of thou shouldst do this, not a covenant of fear, not a covenant of judgment, but a covenant of grace and love and mercy. We affirm our faith in the words of the Apostles' Creed, the ancient creed of the church, and then we move on from that into 5 other little questions, because even we know it's not sufficient to just say, here's what we believe, without also saying, and here's what we mean to do about it. So I hope you're still paying attention when we get to that part. And I hope you pay attention to what you say. Will you continue in the apostles' teaching and fellowship, in the breaking of bread and in the prayers? Will you continue? Well, what if it's too hot in there? What if the organ plays too slow? What if there's a big ball game coming on? Or what if my team lost yesterday? What if it's too cold in there or the organist plays too fast? What if I'm mad at Steve? What if this new bishop you've elected turns out to be a bonehead after all? Or what if some other bishop somewhere else in the country does or says something that it's hard to explain? Will you continue? And the answer is, I will with God's help. I want to make sure that you understand you have God's help. We're not waiting for God to show up. He's been here the whole time. You have God's help. The question is whether you will or not. Will you persevere in resisting evil, and whenever you fall into sin, repent and return to the Lord? Every time. I will with God's help. Will you proclaim the good news of the love of God and what you do and what you say, what you don't do, what you don't say? Will you share the gospel in your life and in your word? Will you seek and serve Christ in all persons? Oh, hold on now. That's a lot of persons. What about this kid right here? What about those old people back there? What about people who don't talk like I do, think like I do, act like I do? What about people I don't like? Seek and serve Christ in them? What about people that don't like me? Will you seek justice for all people and respect the dignity of every human being? Not because they deserve it any more than I do or you do, but because they are God's children, just like you are, just like I am. The answer is I will with God's help. Let me invite you that if you really intend to make an effort to do all those things with God's help, you say it out loud. And if you know going into it that you don't really believe all this stuff, this is just more Sunday morning stuff you have to endure to get to the barbecue, then just stay quiet. Nobody will notice. But don't make promises before God that you do not intend to keep. Okay? We are stewards of God's grace, and we are rich with the gifts He has given us and the gifts that we have to offer to the world. We are rich with God's gifts. One of the wonderful things about being here is that I am among people who have decided to share the gifts they've been given and to invite all sorts of people to come in and be the family of God together. Thanks be to God.